Just a minute. Yeah. Now see, this class will be first defined by developer. Okay, as a part of development, developer will define this class. After defining that class, what developer will do? What developer will do?
Distribute the dot class.
Create object. Jar. Once he compiles, what will he get? He will get student dot class. Student dot class. Now, yeah. After that, what will he create? He will create jar file. That jar file will contain student dot class. Even if one dot class file is there, developer will create jar file, because that is the way people distribute their code in the industry. So even for one dot class file, jar will be created. So jar. And now developer will distribute the jar file to client. Jar file to client. Okay. Define the class, compile the class, you will get dot class file, store that dot class file in the jar file and distribute jar file to client. Now here client. This is client program. Client program will have access to the jar file sent by developer. The way we have access to jar file sent by James Gosling, and that's why we can use all the classes developed by James Gosling, string class, system class, and n number of classes. So client program will have access to the jar file sent by developer. Now think from client point of view. Client will say, okay, developer has shared jar file. In that jar file, I know dot class file is there. But what is the class name? What is the class name? What member functions class has got? What member functions does class have? How client will come to know that? How client will come to know that? Client will not have decompiler where client will operate on the dot class file and convert it to Java. So how client will come to know that? What do you think? Client can access the dot class file given by developer through jar file. No doubt about that. But how client will come to know? Client should know na, that so and so method is there which I can call, which takes the parameter, or so and so method does not accept parameter but has got a return type. So I will get the value. Client should know that. How client will know that?
Sir, he takes relevant properties from that class.
Nine.
There should be some information about the classes present in the jar file.
What?
There should be some information about the classes which are inside the jar file.
Yeah.
What I mean is the names.
Developer's job is incomplete. Developer has done incomplete job by sharing just jar file. In addition to jar file, developer should also distribute the documentation of student class. What is documentation? Documentation is the one which gives idea to client what client can do. What client can do on that class. That is the documentation. So when you don't give documentation to your client, that means client will not be able to understand what he can do on your class. Just giving jar file is not sufficient. Along with jar file, you must give documentation also to the client. So we'll have access to the jar file sent by developer and also the documentation. So now client would like to use the class developed by developer, but he doesn't know what are the methods that class has got. First of all, what is the class name? So what client will do? Client will refer the documentation provided by developer. Through that documentation, client will first of all come to know that how many classes developer has developed. Maybe 2, 3, 5, 10, 20, 100. So through documentation, client will come to know how many classes developer has developed. What are the member functions each and every class has got. That idea client will get through documentation. And now James Gosling and all of us, you know, James Gosling is a developer and all of us, we are client to James Gosling. That means we can use the classes developed by James Gosling. But in the first place, how we will come to know that what classes James Gosling and his team they have developed? Once again, answer is documentation. So James Gosling and his team, they have distributed the jar file or files through API, which is a part of JRE. What about documentation? Where's the documentation? Documentation is also given, but that documentation is not a part of JDK, remember. Don't think that I have installed JDK, I have downloaded JDK, that means I've got documentation also. No, documentation you have to separately download from the net. Where I will show you that. Java 8 documentation. This is the documentation of those classes designed by James Gosling and his team. So Java 8 documentation, download. See, JDK Kit 8 documentation. Yeah, look at this. This you have to download. It doesn't depend on architecture, platform. It's same for all architectures and for all OS platform. It is same. So you just have to download this zip file. This link I will share in the chat box.